Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Yesterday we put these arrows together and today we're going to get them out on the range. I have 125 grain head, just a field point, screwed into the front of this arrow, and you're going to be watching the first shots along with me. There's a few things different about this arrow than my last year's setup, which this bow is tuned for. One, the spine rating is higher numerically, but it's actually a less stiff arrow. That's how arrow spine works. A 200 arrow spine is going to be much stiffer than a 340, which is what these are. So I have a lighter arrow and I have an arrow that has a softer spine rating. Also, it's a larger diameter, so it's sitting slightly tilted up in this arrow rest than the 204 diameter arrows were last year. These are 245s. I'm at 20 yards. I just checked it out with my rangefinder. It's hot and humid out here, but we're going to get a couple of shots in and see where it's hitting and what kind of adjustments I might need to make to my bow for this season. Right off the bat, my shot is left and right centered, but it is about 3 inches high at 20 yards. I'm gonna shoot a couple more times and I'm gonna throw a broadhead in the mix as well and see where it's hitting. Right now I'm mostly concerned about point of impact, not point of aim. If the broadhead and the field point are hitting together, I know my bow doesn't really need to be tuned for these arrows. It's already where it needs to be. If I'm getting a different point of impact with my broadhead and my field point, I know that there's some work to be done. Next, I'm going to take a shot with a broadhead and see if that impacts the same place my last shot did. It still impacted a little bit high, but it looked like it began to plane off to the right a little. I'm going to take another shot with my field point right next to that broadhead and see what it looks like. I'm going to take you guys down there and let you take a look at what I'm seeing. Okay, so you can see our point of impact is not exactly the same. Here's our broadhead, and here's our field point. I was aiming down here at this dot, knowing that it was going to go a little high from our first shot, and it also planed off to the right a little. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is see if a simple knock adjustment will bring this together. If it doesn't, we'll back up to 30 yards and then we'll try it again. And if this gap continues to grow, I know that I need to do some tuning with my bow. I'm going to turn my knock and I'm going to face the odd color fletching instead of facing directly up. I'm going to rotate this arrow and face it towards me. I'm going to see how that shifts the point of impact. As you knock tune, you'll notice, especially with broadheads, your arrow will walk a little bit around the target. If you're making consistent shots, you can use that to help you get all of your arrows grouping in the same place when they're off by just a couple inches. That time my arrow did come a little bit further to the left, so that knock tuning adjustment made a little bit of a change. However, I did notice that the back of the arrow kind of kicked, and you can see that as those fletchings are going through the air. It might look like the back end of your arrow is doing kind of a circle around the front end of the arrow. That usually means that arrow is coming off of your rest cockeyed to one direction or the next. that tells me that I probably have a tuning issue with my bow for these arrows, and I'm going to have to make an adjustment as I walk back my ranges. Okay, now we're back at 30 yards and we're going to shoot those 2 arrows again. We should see that gap widen a little bit, especially if my bow's not very well tuned to these arrows yet. As we see that gap widen, we're going to have to make adjustments one way or another. When we have a bow that's already tuned fairly well, and to me that means bringing your field points and broadheads at least with a few inches of each other, you can make minor adjustments on your rest. At 30 yards, just the smallest adjustment might correct the issue that we're having. When you're broadhead tuning your bow, always shoot your broadhead first. If your arrows are grouping closely together, you don't want to cut the vanes off of your arrows that you've already shot. Okay, now we'll shoot that field point. I'll take you guys down and we'll take a look at it. Okay, here are our shots at 30 yards. Again, this is our broadhead, and this is our field point. That gap is beginning to widen a little bit, even at the distance difference of 10 yards. So I'm going to go back. First, I'm going to adjust my sights to impact where these are impacting, because I want to make sure that I'm not shooting off the target when I adjust my rest. Then I'm going to make a very small adjustment on my rest, and the rule of thumb I always follow is to push the broadhead into the field point. So the first thing I'm going to do is knock my rest over maybe 1/32 of an inch to the left and see what that does at 30 yards. Because we're so close at 30 yards, I'm not going to worry about shimming my cams or twisting cables or doing anything that's going to make a gross or a large adjustment to my bow tune. I think I can probably correct it just with the rest at this point. And after I get the rest, bringing those arrows within an inch or two of each other, knock tuning should take care of the rest. That should be all that it takes. I guarantee we're going to see a difference on target. Now we're going to start the whole process over again, and as always, we're going to shoot this broadhead first. That arrow flight looked really good as it went towards the target. My pins still aren't perfect, but I could watch that arrow travel up and down without the tail kicking out at all. If you see the tail of your arrow starting to kick one way or another as it flies through the air, that's a good indication that your bow's not perfectly tuned. Let's go down and take a look. All right, we got quite a different result. You can see both our arrows are pretty much stacked left and right on top of each other. However, there is a difference in elevation. To be completely honest, I did try to aim at 2 different points of the target to make sure that I wasn't going to smack these arrows together. All right, guys, thanks for watching this video. I hope it was helpful to you and that it's going to help you get ready for your bow season this year. If you guys have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. This is the process I've used now for several years, and it's worked for me. If I had any major adjustments that needed to be made on this bow setup to get it tuned for these arrows, you know, I'd take it to a pro shop, or I'd put it in my bow press and I'd have them put shims on my cams, or maybe if I had a bow that had yokes, we could make some adjustments on those as well. But that stuff should be reserved for gross adjustments or large adjustments if your bow's really out of tune. If you can keep your arrow rest rather, putting that arrow, the center of the arrow, between 3/4 and 7/8 of your bow riser, the edge of your bow riser, you're going to be within a reasonable distance. We call that center shot. Most bows, perfect center shot is found at 13/16 from the center of your arrow spine to the edge of your riser. So that's the distance between the two. If your arrow is close to that, you know that your bow's pretty well tuned, as long as those broadheads and field points are hitting in the same spot. As I walk my bow back, I might find that there's a little bit more of a difference, or those arrows start to grow apart again. And that just means that I need to make a couple more small adjustments to get everything right where it needs to be. So to close out today's video, I want to do something a little different. I'm going to share a verse with you from Proverbs that can be found in the Old Testament of the Bible. This is from chapter 15, verse 1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Consider that as you go throughout your day. As always, guys, I appreciate you watching. God bless.